As a Surge member, you'll unlock access to resources that build confidence, motivation, and mental well-being to empower girls to stay in the game today and pave the way for their future success. Up your game with free professional development and curriculum resources for coaches and athletes. Foster community and connection with VIP access to girls' sporting events, coaching forums, giveaways, and workshops hosted by industry-leading partners. Make waves with exclusive Surge branding packages, designs, and apparel. Recognize and celebrate with special awards like Team of the Season and Athlete of the Season to uplift and honor your female athletes. Unlock exclusive offers, including new product sneak peeks, promos, and member-only Surge stores. Fresh content designed to empower female athletes will be added to the platform every month. So, together, we can help power girls forward.
Everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's Surge webinar with our special guest, Ivy Watts. Ivy Watts is a mental health empowerment speaker, author, former All-American student athlete, and founder of Ivy Watts Speaks. First off, I want to thank you all for being here today. We know as coaches, parents, educators, and athletes, we know you're all extremely busy, so we really appreciate it. Today's content is going to be centered around supporting the mental health of your athletes and yourself. Be sure to stick around until the end to find out if you want a signed copy of Ivy's book, You Are Worth Fighting For. You can also check out the QR code on the screen that was up at the beginning, and we'll put those codes in the chat for you guys as well. With that being said, I'll go ahead and pass things off to Ivy. Ivy, welcome.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I'm so excited to be here today with all of you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We're going to go right ahead and dive in. So I'm so excited to have this conversation with you all around mental wellness and self-care. Great. Now I see it's up. And recognizing that as coaches, you are all in a really unique and strong position to make a really big impact on your athletes. And that can be really sometimes overwhelming and daunting to think about, but also can be really exciting to think about. And that's what where I want to leave you all here with today, is helping you to feel empowered to know that you can make a difference just by being the person that you are. The kind, caring, compassionate person that you are can make more of a difference than you even realize with the athletes that you work with. And so I really want us all to know that we can make that difference and feel empowered to do so. And so we're going to be talking about warning signs and what you can do in a conversation, how to create a culture of mental wellness on your team for your athletes. But we're also going to be talking about how you can support your own mental health, because as a coach, you have so much on your plate. There's so much pressures and expectations on you. And that's in addition to your personal expectations that you have and the personal pressures that you have, and any relationship struggles or traumas that you've had or financial struggles. So there's all these other things that might be going on in your life, and that can cause a lot of overwhelm and sadness. And so if you're coming into this space and you're feeling not okay, knowing that that is more than okay. You're going to hear me say that throughout our time together, is that it is okay to not be okay, because one of the things that I wish I had heard as a student athlete when I struggled with my mental health. But before we get into all of the topics we're going to be talking about today, I want to let you all know that that virtual space that we're in together is a safe space. So I want you all to feel empowered to engage with me, interact with me. There's going to be lots of opportunity to interact in the chat box. But know the more that we have these conversations around mental health, the more that we're going to be able to make a difference in breaking the stigma that exists and make a difference for our athletes. And I also want to say that sometimes when we have these conversations, they might get a little bit overwhelming or uncomfortable, and that's okay. That's why we're having these conversations, to make them more comfortable. But if it ever does become too overwhelming or triggering for you, start taking care of yourself in this space. So maybe that means you get up and take a walk and get away from your computer for a moment, or you put your head down for a moment, whatever you need to do to center yourself and come back and join us when you feel ready. We're going to have a Planet Fitness judgment-free zone in this virtual space together. Awesome. So we're going to go ahead and dive in. The first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to have us do a little bit of a self-reflection. Oh, there we go. And so what we're going to do is really think about asking ourselves the question of how are you doing right now? Because so often we get asked the question, how are you? And when we get asked that question, it's so easy for us to say that we're good or fine or okay, even if it's the worst day of our lives. And so I really want you to check in with yourself and say, how am I doing honestly? Knowing that if you're not okay, that is more than okay. But when you self-reflect and allow yourself to feel your feelings, that's going to really allow you to then ask yourself some follow-up questions and say, what do I need to do to feel even just a little bit better? Who can I reach out to help support me through this struggle that I'm having? So when we allow ourselves to self-reflect, that allows us to see that what we're going through matters, because all of our struggles, no matter how big or small, matter, just because we matter as we are in this moment. And when we're able to see that for ourselves, that's when we're also going to be able to see that for the athletes that we work with as well. And so as I self-reflect about where I'm at today, I'm probably at like a 60%. Did not sleep well last night. I have a 2-year-old toddler, so I've been running around all day with her. Excited to be here, but also really excited for bedtime tonight. And so it's okay that I'm coming into this space and I'm not near 100%. And so as I said, this is a safe space, and I would really love for there to be interaction throughout our time together. And so I'd love if there's anyone who feels comfortable to go into the chat box and just say the percentage that you're at today from 0 to 100%. Again, knowing that it's okay to not be okay, and knowing this is a tool that we can use, and I'll explain why later on, that you can use with your athletes as well. So again, this is a safe space. I already see some responses coming into the chat box. If I can scroll down, let's see, 50%, lots of 50%, 85%, 75%. Thank you so much for sharing. 52%, 90%. 60%, lots of tornado warnings. Yeah, I can definitely see how that's stressful, anxiety provoking. 75%, you have a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old. Oh, yeah, I get it. Awesome. So I appreciate you all just checking in with yourself. And I encourage you to take this as a tool that you use for yourself and check in with yourself multiple times throughout the day. Again, knowing that it's okay to be wherever you're at. And when you check in with yourself and recognize that your struggles are important and matter, that allows you to then be able to say, what do I need to do to help me to get from that 50% to a 55%? And what can I do and who can I reach out to help me through this struggle that I'm having in this moment? That's going to allow you to move through that problem a lot easier. I wish I had done more of that self-reflection when I was a student athlete struggling with my mental health, because I struggled with my mental health for most of my life, but I really struggled in silence because I was terrified of being labeled as anything other than perfect. I grew up believing and hearing a lot of the stigma around mental health. And so I believed that if I talked about what I was going through, I would be labeled as weak. And I grew up with a perfectionist mindset. And so I said, I can't let the world see me as weak. So I struggled and struggled with anxiety and negative self-talk and low confidence and self-doubt, all of that in silence because I was too afraid to talk about it. And before I go on in my story, I'm going to ask you all a question. This is a virtual show of hands. So I'm going to ask you to go into the chat box and put an exclamation point if you also felt that same fear. That fear where you were afraid to talk about what you were going through because you were afraid of being labeled as weak. You're afraid of being judged by other people, your colleagues, your friends. You were afraid that you were going to be a burden on somebody else. So instead, you said it's safer, easier to keep it all in. I see so many exclamation points in the chat box. So thank you for being brave and bold and sharing so honestly with me. So that fear exists for so many of us. That fear exists for the athletes that we work with. That fear exists for our colleagues. That fear exists. And that fear keeps us from talking about our mental health problems. And when we do that, it only leads our mental health problems to grow and grow and grow. And that's exactly what happened to me as I struggled with my mental health and kept it on the inside. My mental health struggles started out when I was a young girl as just physical health issues. And I didn't realize that the headaches and stomach aches and trembling that I spent hours in the doctor's office trying to figure out what was going on with me, I didn't realize that was my body's way of telling me that I was struggling with this really intense anxiety. And I didn't have the words, the language to even know that I was struggling with anxiety. And this just continued to build through middle school and high school. And I was a student athlete my entire life. I ran track. And I poured my entire self-worth into being a track athlete. And I poured my identity into being an athlete. I didn't know who I was outside of being a track athlete. And when I got to college, the pressures and expectations of being a student athlete became too much for me with the anxiety I'd already been dealing with for so long in silence. My coaches put a lot of pressure on me to run one particular goal, and that was to run 54 seconds in the 400-meter dash. And I deemed that time as perfect and I poured my self-worth into running that time. I was doing everything right in a physical health sense, but I was neglecting my mental health. And that was impacting me so much in a negative way and keeping me from running that goal. Because every single time when I got to a meet and got into the blocks right before the official was about to say their commands of runners take your mark and get set, this intense fear and anxiety just flowed through me and told me, I can't do this and I'm not good enough. And it became this vicious cycle where this negativity kept me from running that goal that I had for myself. And that only built in the self hate and negative self talk, which only grew the anxiety and fear for the next meet the following weekend. And it became this cycle that I didn't know how to stop. And nobody recognized that I was struggling so deeply with my mental health because all they saw was that on the outside, I was this perfect person because that's exactly what I wanted them to see. So they saw that I was graduating from college with summa cum laude honors and a near perfect GPA, just like they saw in high school. I had school records and perfect GPA as well. They saw that I was all American in the 4x400 and that I was about to be named Woman of the Year for my conference and a top 30 finalist for the NCAA Woman of the Year award. All of these incredible accomplishments, but for me, didn't really feel like anything because I felt like I was leaving my collegiate career, my track career as a failure because I didn't do that one thing that my coaches put so much pressure on me to do, that I put so much pressure on me to do. I didn't run that 54 seconds in the 400 and I hated myself. I was losing my identity as an athlete and I was starting to spiral into a depression and struggling with thoughts of not wanting to be here anymore. And it wasn't until a couple of years after college that I was finally able to get the help that I wish I had gotten when I was just a young girl. And that was because I had a former high school teammate open up to me about her struggle with her mental health and what she was doing about it. And I wanted to know what that could feel like. I didn't want to feel so stuck in my pain anymore. So this is the first time I ever had a conversation that broke down the stigma that I grew up believing and allowed that stigma to finally break down for me to be able to walk into the doors of therapy and get the help that I so desperately needed. Therapy truly changed and saved my life and allowed me to see for the first time that society has it all wrong. Talking about what you're going through is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength because you recognize that you want and deserve more, and you can't do that alone. And that is more than okay. Therapy allowed me to see that I have a voice, just like you have a voice and your athletes have a voice. And we can use our voice to unpack the pain and the pressures and the expectations that all of us are under. We can use our voice to work through any sadness or relationship challenges, life changes, traumas that we've had. We can use our voice to work through all of those things. And that is healing. That is self-care. And each and every single one of us is worthy of recognizing the power of our voice, not only to make changes for our athletes and on our teams, but also to make changes for healing within us as well, knowing that we are worthy of that, knowing that we are worthy of getting the help that we have always deserved, no matter how big or small our problem is. When we can see that for ourselves, that our voice matters and that we are worthy of getting help, it makes it easier for us to share those messages with our student athletes that we're working with. So being able to recognize that it starts with us, being able to see that what you're going through matters and is important. And that's going to add a layer of validity when you're working with your athletes and helping them to see that what they're going through matters and is important. Even though I got to this really great space of self-love and self-care, I won't lie and say that mental health recovery isn't a process because it is. I still struggle with my mental health, going through lots of big life changes. I still struggle with anxiety and negative self-talk and low self-esteem. I struggle with so many different things, with grief of losing my mom, becoming a new mom, finding different identities, becoming a single mom, all of these different things. But I want all of you to know that that's okay. It's not about reaching a destination of happiness. It's about learning to love and give ourselves the same compassion that we so easily give to others. And again, it starts with us. When we give ourselves that love and compassion, then we're easily able to give it to others as well. And so I want you to know that no matter what you're going through in this moment or in the past or in the future, that it matters, but that you also have the tools and strengths within you to work through whatever challenge you might be having, and that you're not stuck in your pain, and that you can keep putting one foot in front of the other to get through whatever challenge you're having right now in this moment. And as I share my story, you might be reflecting right now on your own story and your own struggle with your mental health, or maybe you're thinking about the athletes that you work with, and maybe you have an athlete who looks like me and has it all together, and they're your star athlete. They do great in the classroom, they do great on the court, the track, the field, But then you might be thinking, are they struggling with their mental health? And so now we're going to really start talking about what you can do to really make a difference and empowering you to know that you can make that difference in supporting the student athletes that you work with. So the first thing that we're going to start doing is talking about warning signs to look out for. And when I start talking about these warning signs, the biggest thing I want to say here is that the goal is not for you to leave here as a mental health professional. Goal is for you to recognize that you know your athletes really well. You're in a really unique and prime position. And so you can recognize if an athlete is acting differently than their norm. And that is cause enough for concern to reach out and have a conversation. And we'll talk about what that looks like. But recognizing that you can make a difference because you recognize if a student athlete is acting differently than their norm. So that's the biggest thing we want to remember here is that we might not remember all of the warning signs, but if we're concerned, we can reach out and have a conversation. So the first warning sign I want to go through is withdrawal and loss of interest. So this could look like a student athlete who's usually always on time for practice, or when they're there, they're cheering on their teammates. But recently it's been really difficult to even get them to practice, or they're not engaged when they're at practice. A lot of times we might associate this with stigmatizing language, like someone is acting out. But it often can be that they're struggling with their mental health. And when you're struggling, you don't want to do the things that you used to love to do. So often may become more withdrawn or lose interest in those activities. So recognizing that could be someone who is struggling with their mental health and not sure how to work through it. Substance use. Another thing we might be saying that an athlete is acting out, they're going against team rules or school rules. But a lot of times when we're struggling and we don't have healthy coping mechanisms, we'll turn to something that feels good for a quick fix, like substance use. And so recognizing it might not be someone who's acting out, they just don't know what else to do to help them to feel better. So they're turning to something that they think will help, but it isn't a longer term fix. Anger or irritability is another warning sign. When we think about expressing our feelings, maybe we feel like we can't cry about it or let it out in the way that we want to because of that stigma, because of that fear so many of us say that we have felt before in the past. And so our feelings have to come out in some way. Maybe you snapped at somebody before when you were having a really tough day and we're keeping it all on the inside. So if you have an athlete who's been really irritable lately, might not be something that is a reflection of you. It could be really that they're struggling with their mental health and they're not sure how else to communicate it because of that stigma. Perfectionism. So maybe you have an athlete who does look like me or looked like me as a student athlete and has it all together. Often these are the athletes we say we don't need to check in on, but these athletes are sometimes the ones who are struggling the most because perfectionism can lead to low self-esteem and negative self-talk because we feel like we're always falling short of a perfect standard. And so that can lead to anxiety and depression as well. So we want to make sure that we are looking out for those who look like they have it all together and those who look like they're struggling. Physical health issues with no explanation. And so I mentioned when I was younger, I struggled a lot with headaches and stomach aches and trembling. If you have an athlete who's been really sick lately and there's no medical explanation as of yet, it's not that there might not be a medical explanation, but that recognizing the mental health and physical health connection. So a lot of times our bodies will tell us before we're ready to say so mentally that we're struggling. And so recognizing an athlete who might be struggling physically could be having a mental health struggle. And then this last warning sign I just want to acknowledge is challenging to talk about. And I want to remind you that this is a safe space and to take space for yourself if you need to. But recognizing that suicide is the second leading cause of death for young people. And so it is something that we want to take seriously. And if you ever see a student athlete or hear a student athlete talking about death or dying, we want to make sure we're always taking that seriously and taking the necessary follow-up protocols, which I'll talk about in a moment. But this might not always look like a student athlete saying that they don't want to be alive anymore. It could look like someone saying, there's no hope for me, or the world would be better off without me, or I'm just so tired. So we want to make sure that we're always taking these statements seriously, that we're always following up, having a conversation, and getting the professional help, again, which we will talk about. But I can't reiterate enough that although there's so many different warning signs that exist around mental health challenges in our athletes, it's really important to remember that if you notice an athlete is acting differently than their norm, that is cause enough for concern to reach out, have a conversation, and know that you can make a difference. And so, what does that conversation look like? A lot of times we are afraid to even start a conversation around mental health because we're afraid to say or do the wrong thing. But I really want to empower you all to know the power of just listening and being there for that athlete. If they come to you and say they want to talk about something that's going on, listening without judgment communicates to that person, I see you and I hear you without even actually saying those words. And that can make more of a difference than you even realize. So listening can be huge in a conversation, and that can really make a big impact for an athlete to know that they can continue to talk about their mental health with you or with somebody else. And that's where validation comes in as well. Maybe you don't understand what that person is going through. You've never experienced anything similar. Or maybe you don't think it's a big deal, right? Sometimes we might feel that way because of that stigma that we've grown up believing. Recognizing that validating someone's experiences really helps them to see that what they're going through matters, no matter how big or small it is to you or to them. And so saying things like, that sounds really tough, what you're going through. I can only imagine how difficult that must be for you, really allows that person to feel less alone and validated in their struggles. And again, empowers them to keep talking about their mental health with you or with somebody else. And then asking open-ended questions, another great thing to do in a conversation. So this allows a conversation to flow deeper and also gives empowerment to that athlete to know that they can make decisions about their mental health. They're not stuck in that pain. So you can ask things like, what can I do to help? Or what have you done before in the past when you struggled with something similar? What helped you then? And can you do that now? Or can we do that activity together? I'm here for you. So those open-ended questions can be really powerful. And then recognizing that you're not alone in having these conversations. And so recommending resources both on and off school campus. And so you can say to an athlete, I'm always here for you, but here's a resource at school that can do even more for you, or an online resource that I learned about that can do even more for you, but I'm always here for you. I'll help you to make that phone call. I'll walk with you to the counseling center. Just recognizing that you have resources that you can direct your athletes to. You don't have to be alone in having these conversations, and it allows them to see that they have many different resources and options to talk to about their mental health. And so that's the conversation piece. You can listen and validate and ask open-ended questions, recommend some resources. But I also want to empower you to know that you can make changes in the day-to-day structure with your team, with your athletes, to really support your athletes through the pressure. The goal isn't to take away the pressure that they have, because as we all know, pressure exists in all realms of our lives. And so that pressure and that stress is always going to be there. So we want to give them tools to help them through that pressure. And so I think there's a lot of power that you have, since you have so many touch points with your athletes, to take the space that you already have in the day to day through practices and meetings and competitions to really take space to implement creative check ins and self care. And so, as you remember in the beginning, I asked you all how you're doing from 0 to 100%. And so, you can make a point of having a creative and consistent check in before anyone walks into your office, before you start any practice or team meeting, and saying, how are you doing today? And having that creative piece allows someone to refrain from just saying that they're good. And so being able to have some kind of level there of 0 to 100% can allow that person to think a little bit more about where they're really at. You can also do a color one, which folks have really liked, of red, yellow, and green. Maybe you have this up on your office wall or in a locker room. You have 4 colors. So red, yellow, and green is, I'm red, I'm not good today at all. Yellow, I'm doing okay. And green is, I'm great. And then you have a fourth color, which is purple. And purple means, I want to talk about it. And so you ask every athlete before they come into your office or before they're about to start practice what color they are. If they say they're just red and they're not purple, they don't want to talk about it, maybe that impacts the way you coach them that day, or you encourage them to take a mental health day, or encourage them to practice self-care. But if they're red and purple, then set some time aside to have a conversation with them. Just a creative way, and that consistency behind it is something I wish I had. I wish that my coaches created a space where over time I would have felt empowered to be able to say, this is a space that I can say I'm not okay, and there's not going to be judgment on the other side. So that consistency is really key with the athletes that you work with. And over time, they'll be able to see this as a safe space that they can come to and talk to you. I heard from so many athletes that they know they can practice self-care, but they don't know how to do it or how to implement into their day. So I really encourage you to take space in the time that you have through practices and meetings and competitions to implement self-care. So for a team meeting or before a practice, doing some affirmations, doing some journal prompts together, doing a quick meditation, just showing them the tools that exist for self-care. Because the more that we demonstrate and talk about self-care, the more they're going to have those tools when they go back home and they're not sure what to do, they're going to remember those tools that were given to them. And then be relatable as well. I mentioned how I had a friend who opened up to me about her struggle with her mental health, and that was the only reason that I got help for myself at that time. And so being relatable can be huge. It normalizes you as their coach that you're a human and that you also struggle, but it also helps your athletes to feel less alone in what they're going through. Maybe you have an athlete who isn't yet ready to talk about their mental health. When you can be open and relatable about your own struggles, when that athlete is ready to talk about it, they'll know exactly who to start with because you've been so open. So before you do a self-care tool, you can say, I'm really stressed out about this upcoming competition. And when I get really stressed, I like to do a meditation. I'm going to give you all this quick 2-minute meditation that we're going to do together in hopes that you can take it with you if you're feeling really stressed about competition or anything else in your life. So it really just normalizes the conversation and humanizes you and that you also struggle, and that can help them as well to feel less alone. And then ultimately just following up. If you know that an athlete is struggling, checking in with them and following up and letting them know that you care about their mental wellness, not just in that one point in time, but for however long that struggle goes on. That really communicates to them that you care about them as more than just an athlete. And recognizing that as we implement a mental wellness culture, it can feel like yet another thing to do of having these check-ins and implementing the self-care, but it has a direct impact on athletic performance. When we feel good mentally, our body feels good as well. And as I mentioned with the physical health piece and that warning sign, if you're feeling bad mentally, physically, that can also impact your mental health. And so recognizing that as we pour into our athletes and their mental wellness, it can help with their athletic performance as well. And so I want you all to feel empowered to know that you can make that difference in creating the culture of mental wellness on your team. And over time, you communicate that message that you care about them on all levels and really helps them to feel seen and heard and allows them to continue to talk about their mental health with you or getting that professional help through a different resource. Earlier, I mentioned one of the warning signs. Oh, sorry. The last piece of creating a culture is practicing kindness. This is a big one to do that's really simple as well because we never know what someone is going through. You never know if someone's having the toughest day of their life. So practice that kindness. Give them a kind gesture or a hug or a compliment, knowing that can go a really long way in helping someone to feel less alone. And just being aware of some of that stigmatizing language as well that we often hear in the athletic culture around suck it up or walk it off, but really recognizing that that can be negative for somebody and not necessarily empowering for somebody. So being aware of language and how it can impact each athlete differently and having those follow-up conversations if an athlete doesn't necessarily take one part of language well as some other athlete might. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the warning signs that encourage you to take breaks as you need to, as this can be a very heavy conversation, is suicidal ideation. We want to talk about suicide prevention and knowing there's so many more in-depth resources that you can use through a QPR resource training, suicide prevention trainings that you can do. But I really want to empower you all to know that you can make a difference in supporting the athletes you have who might be struggling with suicidal ideation. So if you see an athlete who might be struggling and you're concerned about them, you can ask a question like, I've noticed that you've been withdrawn. Sometimes when people feel that way, they might be struggling with thoughts of suicide. Do you feel this way? Are you feeling suicidal? I know for many of you that might feel really scary or overwhelming to even think about asking that question because am I going to put the idea in someone's head? There's actually no research to prove that. However, instead, when you ask that question, it instead allows that person to feel seen and heard and can help them to get the help that they need. So asking that question can truly help to save a life. And so that I've noticed helps them to feel seen and just directly asking, are you feeling suicidal? If someone says yes, again, this is something can be really overwhelming and fearful for us to even think about. But what I want you to remember is that you don't have to have these conversations alone and you shouldn't have them alone. And so it's really important that we get professional help involved right away. So that can be a local crisis team, a crisis team on campus that you have. It can be the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which you just dial 988. But you really just want to get another person in the room with you, whether that's a fellow coach, or a professional on campus, someone from the counseling center. You want to get somebody else in the room with you, and you want to just make sure you stay with that person until that additional adult comes to support you with that student. And so then you can figure out together what the best next steps are. And so each school is different around your protocols here, but just knowing that the biggest thing to do in the situation while you're waiting for that additional person to come and for that person to get that professional help is that you want to just do all the things we talked about on that last slide and just listening and validating, even if you don't understand, just providing that support, providing that space for that student, and just practicing that kindness can be really, really helpful in those spaces. But just again, knowing that you shouldn't and don't have to have these conversations alone, and you can call in another person to get there to help to get that athlete the professional help that they need. And so again, I know this can be a heavy conversation, but I want us to remember that anytime we see someone struggling or potentially think they might be struggling with suicidal ideation, or we hear them actively saying it out loud, we want to make sure we're always taking it seriously and always making sure they're getting the professional help afterwards. We want to make sure after that we want to follow up as well and to check in with them and again communicate that we care about their mental wellness even after they've gotten that professional help, because our mental health struggles can continue, right? And they do. As I mentioned for myself, they continue to happen for me. And so recognizing that piece of following up is so critical there. And so we spent a lot of time talking about what you can do in recognizing warning signs, having conversations, implementing a mental wellness culture on your team, and suicide prevention. Now, I really want to transition into focusing on you and your mental wellness, because in order for you to be your best self for anybody in the athletes that you support or anybody in your life, you have to pour into yourself first. You have to be able to see that you are worthy and deserving of the same love and compassion that you so easily give to other people. And so recognizing it starts with you. And when you know your own self-care tools, it makes it easier for you to share those with your student athletes as well. It adds some more validity behind them and helps them to believe that this is going to help them as well. And so before I share with you all a self-care tool that I want you all to take with you today, I'm going to invite you to go back into the chat box. Again, this is a safe space, and just share with me, what are some of the things that you do when you feel overwhelmed or sad or frustrated? What are some of your self-care tools that help you through some of the challenging times that you might be having? Go ahead and share some of your self-care tools in the chat box. What do you do to help you through a challenging time? I see exercise. So you have the power of movement, the mind body connection that we've talked about, right? So moving your body is so healing, not only for your physical health, but also really great for your mental health as well. Let out stress in a healthy way. Taking your fur babies to the beach, yeah, so having pets is really great as well, and then getting outside and walking them is great, good for that physical movement again, going to the beach with beautiful scenery and nature, deep breathing, the power of just being in this current moment, the power of your breath. You can use that in a meeting setting, when you're out coaching, you can use that when you're driving. It's a great one. Making a list and checking things off that list is huge. Taking a bath, getting a pedicure, cleaning, gardening, awesome. I love all of these tools, and I love that you already have some tools in your toolkit. I want you all to recognize that you don't have to wait for your mental health problems to get really big or overwhelming, like I did, to start pouring into your mental wellness. You can start today to start lay that foundation of mental wellness and self-care and self-love, and that's going to help you through the future difficult times that you will experience in your life. So laying that foundation is really critical. And so what I'm going to share with you all today is a tool called Emotional Freedom Technique Tapping. I love this tool because it's a form of meditation, and you can take it with you truly anywhere, anytime. It uses your hands and your body, as you're able to have access to those, to be able to tap on 10 different energy points. And when you tap on those energy points, it helps to send positive messages to your brain to reduce any negative feeling that you might be having. So sadness or overwhelm, whatever it might be. This is rooted in Chinese medicine if you want to do some more research, but I've really loved this tool. It's helped me a lot in my grieving process of losing my mom a couple of years ago. It's been really helpful for me in my big life changes. So I really want to give this tool to you, for you all to take with you today to use for yourself. And if you find it really helpful, you can share it with your student athletes as well and implement it with a day-to-day with them as well. The biggest part of tapping is you want to identify the issue, what's bothering you. So maybe you're stressed and overwhelmed about how to best support the athletes that you work with, or you have a loved one that has a health issue. You have just overwhelmed about all the things on your to-do list. Whatever it is, you want to measure that issue from 0 to 10, with 10 being the most intense. The reason why we want to do that is because self-care isn't going to always fix our problem. If we go out and we journal or we meditate, that problem that we have is still going to be there. But self-care takes us to be just maybe going from a 10 at the most intense to an 8. And that allows us to be able to move through that problem a little bit easier. So we're not always fixing the problem, but we're helping us to feel just a little bit better. Then we want to take the issue and we want to couple it with an affirmation. So we might say, even though I'm anxious about managing all the demands in my life, I still deeply love and accept myself. So we recognize that what we're going through is a valid problem, but we also recognize that we are worthy of love and acceptance from others and from ourselves. And so today I would really love for us to do this tool together, because I want you to leave here today with a hands-on tool that you can take anywhere, anytime, as a really great way to tap on these energy points and send that positive message to your brain to help to reduce any negative feeling that you might be having. Today, our affirmation is pretty general. You can take this in the future and make it your own. You can change anxious to frustrated to sad and the about to whatever you're feeling in this moment. Today, I'm going to encourage you to do this activity with me, and I'm going to say the affirmation, and you're just going to focus on the tapping, and I'll walk you through what that looks like. I'm going to close my eyes because it feels better for me to do that, but if you choose to keep yours open, that's also totally fine. I really invite you to have this healing and mindful moment with me as a tool that you can take with you for yourself and also share with your athletes as well. So the way that it works is you're going to take the hand that you typically write with. If you're a righty, you're going to use your right hand for all the tapping. And if you're a lefty, you're going to use your left hand for all the tapping. This first one, you actually need both hands. So I'm going to visualize everybody's hands, jazz hands up in the air. And so for this first one, it's called the karate chop. And so you're going to tap on the outside of your non-dominant hand. Again, I'm going to say the affirmation. You just focus on the tapping. And as we go through, I'm also going to ask that you find one of the 10 areas that stands out to you, and I'll explain why afterwards. Okay, we're going to begin tapping on our karate chop area. So even though I'm anxious about managing all of the demands in my life, I still deeply love and accept myself. Wonderful. Next, you're going to take your hand in between your eyebrows. Even though I'm anxious about managing all the demands in my life, I still deeply love and accept myself. Next, you're going to take your hand outside of your eyebrow. Even though I'm anxious about managing all the demands in my life, I still deeply love and accept myself. Next is going to be underneath your eye. Even though I'm anxious about managing the demands in my life, I still deeply love and accept myself. The next is my personal favorite, but again, just take note of which one feels calming or healing to you, is underneath your nose. Even though I'm anxious about managing the demands in my life, I still deeply love and accept myself. The next is your chin. Even though I'm anxious about managing the demands in my life, I still deeply love and accept myself. The next is your opposite collarbone. Even though I'm anxious about managing the demands in my life, I still deeply love and accept myself. The next, you have to raise your opposite arm and tap underneath your opposite arm. Even though I'm anxious about managing the demands in my life, I still deeply love and accept myself. The next, you're going to take your hand, go on top of your head. Even though I'm anxious about managing all the demands in my life, I still deeply love and accept myself. And finally, you're going to take all of your fingers, you're going to tap the tips of your fingers together. Even though I'm anxious about managing all the demands in my life, I still deeply love and accept myself. So you can go ahead and open your eyes if you chose to close them. And I hope you just take a moment and lock in that healing energy that you just created within your body, even if that felt a little silly at times. And I just really encourage you to take this as a tool that you can take anywhere, anytime. Is a really great way to rewire your brain and break down some of the negativity or sadness you might be feeling. As I mentioned, as we went through, to find one area that stood out to you as calming or healing. You don't have to say it out loud, but if you want to go ahead and put it into the chat box and share which one really stood out for you, that would be really great, because I think one of the biggest things about this is you might not always remember all 10 of the different tapping and points, or you might not have time to do it. You might not even remember the affirmation, but if you're in a really stressful situation, you can just come back to that one space. So for me, it's just right here, and I do this just a lot, and that really provides a lot of healing and comfort for me. So I see a ton of you have found your one energy point. So I encourage you to take that with you as a really great way to recognize you can rewire your brain and work through some of that sadness you might be feeling. This is a tool, again, you can take and share with your athletes. And if you enjoyed it, you can say, I've been using this tool. I learned about it. It's been really helpful for me. I want to share this tool with you all as well. So recognizing it can be really powerful for you and for others. So I love this tool. Again, you can take it with you anywhere, anytime. The only one I wouldn't recommend taking anywhere is probably the tips of your fingers while you're driving, but everything else is fair game. Awesome. So now I want to go over some resources for you. So again, as I mentioned, you're never alone in supporting your athletes. You're also never alone in the mental health struggles that you might be having. And so I want to go through some online resources that exist for you. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, you can call 24/7 and call 988. So really great resource if you have an athlete who you know is struggling with suicidal ideation, great resource to call to help walk you through that conversation. Again, it can feel really overwhelming or fearful. There's also a really great resource if you're wanting to talk about your mental health and maybe you're not struggling with suicidal ideation, that's okay. You can still reach out to this resource. Know there's a trained individual on the other side to help walk you through that struggle that you're having. It's a really great way to feel empowered to start using your voice and know that you're worthy of getting help. The crisis text line is also a really great resource, very similar to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, but instead of calling, you would text. Another great resource to really help to rewire your brain to see that what you're going through matters. So these are really great resources, again, for yourself, but to suggest to your athletes as well. Maybe they're not yet ready to talk to you, but they can start with these resources and start seeing that what they're going through matters and is important. Therapy for Black Men, Therapy for Black Girls, Latinx Therapy, and the Asian Mental Health Collective are all resources that are really great to break the heightened stigma around mental health in communities of color. I know this all too well. Growing up in a Black family, we never talked about mental health. And so this is the reason why I believed the stigma around mental health so deeply and why it impacted me so much throughout my life and kept me from getting the help I needed. So these resources are really great to connect with others who have similar experiences and who look like you, and also to be able to find therapists of color in the area. So I really encourage you to share these resources with your athletes of color. And then the Trevor Project. This is really great for your athletes who might identify with LGBTQ plus community. Another great way to feel less alone and connect with others with similar experiences. And they also have a 24/7 texting line and crisis phone line as well. So knowing you're never alone in your mental health if you're struggling, and you're also never alone in supporting the mental health of your athletes. You can direct them to these resources along with other resources at your school and in your community. But just knowing that you're never alone, your voice matters, your athlete's voice matters. The more that we talk about mental health, the more that we encourage people to get the help that they deserve, the more that we're going to be able to make a difference in breaking the stigma and allow them to see and allow ourselves to see that no matter what we're going through, we are always, always worthy of getting help. And we don't have to hold it all on the inside. That is where true healing begins, when we can let those things off our chest. That allows for that longer term healing rather than pushing our feelings off as insignificant. And so this brings me to my final and favorite self-care technique, which is the self-care technique of the power of positivity and self-love. Because so often we tell ourselves everything negative. We say, I can't do this, I'm a failure, I'm not good enough. And when we say those things, our mind and our body begins to believe it. And so over time, our body starts carrying ourselves in a more negative way, and more negative people and opportunities come to us. And so we have an opportunity to change our mindset to be more positive, to be more loving towards ourselves, to give ourselves that love and compassion that we deserve. And that is where the power of positivity and self love comes in. Because over time, your brain starts to act in a more positive way. Your body starts to feel differently. You carry yourself differently. More positive opportunities come to you. And that is the difference that I want you all to know. I want you all to feel that you are worthy and capable and good enough of making a difference with the athletes that you're working with, and that you're also worthy and capable of reaching whatever goal that you have for yourself. But it really begins with yourself. We all have limitations, but it's our mindset about those limitations that's either going to help to hold us back or help to set us free and to move forward in reaching our goals that we have for ourselves. And so I really want us all to be able to know that we can begin to implement the power of positivity and self-love. And being positive doesn't mean having positivity all of the time in our lives. Being positive and having self-love is about going out there and maybe having a goal for yourself and you don't do as well as you want to. Then it's about going back home and being frustrated with yourself. Part of self-care is sitting in that feeling, even though it's uncomfortable. That allows for longer term healing. And so it's sitting in that feeling, and then it's allowing yourself to say, today wasn't my best day and I can be frustrated with myself, but I know that I'm worthy of trying again and again and again. And that is what the power of self-love is about. It's about not being stuck in that pain and knowing that you are worthy of continuously trying over and over. I wish I had the beauty and power of self-love when I was a student athlete. It wouldn't have prevented my mental health struggles, but it would have given me a lot of grace towards myself, love for myself, and I would have had a lot more fun throughout my experience. And so as you think about how you're supporting your athletes and how you can support yourself and your busy schedules and all that you have, and I don't have time to practice self-care, I want you to come back to these affirmations and know that you are worthy, capable, and good enough to make a difference as you are in this moment. Just being the kind, loving, compassionate person that you are, you can make a difference for others and for yourself. So what we're going to do to wrap up our time is we're going to say these affirmations together. I'd love if you can come off of mute, but I understand if you're not in a space to do that. So I definitely want to see you in the chat box at the very least. But what we're going to do is we're going to have this positive moment together where we're going to send messages to our brain again. It's a powerful moment. I know the change won't happen overnight, but you can start to lay this foundation today, and that's going to help you through your life. And again, this is a tool you can use with your athletes. It takes 3 seconds to do, and you can do this before a practice or a game or a competition and help them to see that they are all of these affirmations and so much more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say the first affirmation, and if you're able to unmute, I'd love for you to do that, but otherwise you can go in the chat box. I'll say the second affirmation, you'll repeat it in the chat box or out loud, and I'll say the third one. We'll do that for all 3. So I'm going to kick us off, and I hope we can have this positive mindset together as we wrap up all of the things that we've talked about today, knowing you can make a difference as you are in this moment. So the first one is, I am worthy. See if I can hear anybody. I see some in the chat box. I love it. Perfect. Okay, the next one is, I am capable. Awesome. And the last one is, I am good enough. Awesome. I see someone has no microphone. That's okay. Perfect. No problem. So that was a really great first try, but I think on the second one, especially because I couldn't hear you, I want to see you get into this chat box with capital letters and exclamation points, because I want you all to remember that who you are in this moment is worthy and capable and good enough and strong and talented and can do anything you want in this world if you begin to believe in yourself and the person that you are in this moment. I want you all to leave here with the power and the beauty of self-love. It's going to help you so much. It helps me so much through the day-to-day. Again, it's not about being positive all the time, but it's about being forgiving and loving towards ourselves. And we have that foundation for ourselves. It makes it so much easier for the athletes that we work with. So I'm going to get loud, and I'm going to see you getting loud in the chat box as well with those capital letters and exclamation points. I already see Susan's going after it, so I love it. So let's do a take 2, because I know I need the extra positivity today with my toddler. So I am worthy. I want to see in the chat box.
I am worthy.
I love it. And I'm hearing someone that's beautiful music to my ears. I capable.
I
Amazing.
am capable.
I love it. And the last one is, I am good enough.
I am good enough.
Amazing, amazing. Take those positive affirmations with you. Know that who you are is good enough. Know that you can make a difference with your athletes and supporting them in their mental wellness just by being who you are. Know that you can ask open-ended questions and listen and support them and recommend resources, implement self-care into the day-to-day, that you can take space to do creative check-ins that communicate to them over time, that they can talk about their mental health. It's a safe space to do so, and that you can truly make a difference with your athletes, and that you can also pour into yourself. The more that you know your own self-care techniques, the easier it's going to be to share those with your athletes that you're working with. And that's how together we make a difference in breaking the stigma and really saving and changing lives. So I thank you all so much for being here with me today. We have time for questions. I also want to say that at this QR code, you can get your copy of my book, You Are Worth Fighting For, which really builds off a lot of things we talked about today with self-care and self-love. It honors the life of my mom, who passed away a couple of years ago. It has 11 of her life lessons, and each of those life lessons I put my own mental wellness spin on to help you define self-care and self-love. You can use code SURGE to get 20% off, and that code is going to last forever. So feel free to check that out if you want to check out my book. And then I also have a mental wellness toolkit at that QR code as well that has a lot of the things we talked about today, with that EFT tapping tool in it as well. If you want to take that back to your team, you can download that QR code, download that mental wellness toolkit. So if there's any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat box or say them out loud, but I'd love to hear any questions that folks have.